Hello there. Well, some pundits are suggesting that Rachel Reeves' budget wasn't as bad as they'd feared. Have you tried telling that to thousands of small businesses, many of which will either have to shed staff, put up prices or cease trading altogether? And that will have an impact on their suppliers and consumers alike. Also, as we feared, motorists haven't escaped either, and we'll take a look at some of those measures and see how they might impact on everyone and the older generation in particular. And also, the Unite Union has launched a major bid to get the winter fuel payment restored. Yay! Welcome to Grey Matters. Hello and welcome to Grey Matters, the channel that promotes the fact that the older generation still matters, still has relevance, and which looks at issues that matter to the older generation. Now, last week I promised we'd take a look at the budget, and I'm sure by now most of you know what Reeves has announced, some of which really beggars belief, especially if she was looking for growth in the economy. So let's start by looking at how she's hit the motorist. Now, first of all, she lulled us into a false sense of security by announcing that our greatest fear, a hike in the fuel duty, was not going to happen. And that of course rules out pay per mile too at the moment. Then she announced new car tax measures to help people adapt to electric vehicles. In her terms, the government has pledged to strengthen incentives to purchase electric cars. In other words, she's going to penalise everyone else. From April the 1st next year, zero emission cars will pay the lowest first year rate of £10. Rates for cars with CO2 emissions of between 1 and 50 grams per kilometre and 51 to 70 grams per kilometre, including hybrids, will increase to £110 and £130 respectively, to bring them closer to higher emitting cars. Now, cars in the bands for emissions of 76 to 90 parts per kilometre and above will pay double the current equivalent rates. Now, there was a quote from John Cassidy, Director of Sales at Close Brothers Motor Finance, and that made me laugh. Talking about the issue, he said, "The desired effect of the measure will not only be to stimulate demand for new electric vehicles, but also boost the demand for used EVs and support the residual values of electric cars, which have fallen by 60% in the last 22 months. In other words, the second-hand value of them. But of course the values have fallen. No bugger wants them. It's all very well hyping up electric vehicles, but the bottom line is thousands of motorists, many from the poorer sections of society, are going to suffer greatly. Let's know your views on this in the comments. I know you're going to have plenty to say. You always do. Now, two of Reeves' other announcements have been so ill thought out. Yeah, no, probably they all were. But these two are going to have a massive fallout across all sections of society. And that's the increase in the minimum wage, particularly putting those under 18 up to £10 an hour, and increasing NI for small companies. Now, for example, hairdressing salons, nail bars, beauty salons will be laying off staff, and they won't be taking on as many trainees. The alternative is to put up prices, but they know there's only so much the public will pay for these services when they too are trying to make ends meet. So we risk seeing a decline in these businesses. There's a sports club has reported that it will have to put up prices and lay off staff, which will put intolerable strain on the remaining staff members as they attempt to fill the gaps in the rota. There's a pub landlord who's reported he intends to pass on the 1p a pint reduction in duty to his customers, but only once he's sold the 50,000 pints needed to cover the rise in wages and NI. Again, the alternative is to lay off staff and pick up the slack himself. There's only so many hours people can work. High streets across the UK are going to be one of the worst hit places, with smaller shops and businesses having to increase prices, which could see customers being driven away to bigger out-of-town establishments, or they'll have to lay off staff. which will see a huge growth in the unemployment rates. This so-called party of the working class is in one fell swoop going to trash thousands of small businesses that provide goods and services and employment. Quite frankly, it's unbelievable. The Chancellor doesn't appear to have a fiscal brain cell in her head, and I can't believe her Treasury advisors haven't warned her about the consequences of all this. Bringing this back to the demographic of our viewers, when the cost of a haircut at the barber's goes up, or a cut and blow dry at the hairdresser's, or the price of meat from the butcher's, or food from the local convenience store, when those prices go up, those people may well find themselves having to make some hard choices. Okay, a cut and colour might not be one of life's essentials, but why should people in modern day Britain be expected to go without, or maybe risk financial hardship trying to maintain, or maybe even hopefully improve upon their current standard of living? If you thought austerity was bad, I don't think we've seen anything yet. When we come back after this short break, we've got some great news about the battle to restore the winter fuel payment, and we'll be checking out how you can protect your money from Labour's £40 billion tax grab. We'll see you in a moment. Hello and welcome back. Unite, one of the UK's leading unions, has announced it has launched a judicial review process to overturn the government's decision to cut the winter fuel payment to all but the poorest pensioners. Now, this is great news. On the 29th of September, they sent a pre-action protocol letter to Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State at the Department of Work and Pensions, requesting that the government reverse the removal of the winter payment and repeal the regulations they introduced last August. Now, they have to do this to allow the government the opportunity to reverse the policy before the action can go any further. And they only have until the 7th of November to respond. Now, if the government chooses not to reverse the decision, then Unite will seek leave of the High Courts to mount a full judicial review. Now, Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham has said that people don't understand how the Labour government has taken away a fuel allowance for millions of pensioners just as winter approaches. Do you remember her passionate response at the Labour Party conference? It was brilliant. She was really passionate about this. Let's remind ourselves of that.
Friends, people simply do not understand. I do not understand how our new Labour government can cut the winter fuel allowance for pensioners and leave the super rich untouched. This is not what people voted for. It's the wrong decision and it needs to be reversed.
Oh, yeah, she was good, wasn't she? In a press statement released a couple of days ago, she said that given the failure to rectify this in the budget, Unite has now commenced judicial review proceedings, challenging the legality of the policy. It's not too late for Labour to register the hurt that this cruel policy has caused, step back from picking the pockets of pensioners, and do the right thing. Absolutely right. So, on what grounds is Unite taking action against the government? Well, firstly, as we stated in an earlier edition of Grey Matters, the government has a legal duty to refer the cuts to the Social Security Advisory Committee, the SAC, which they didn't do. Now, Unite says that that failure makes the regulations void. Secondly, the government should have gathered considerable evidence of the impact of the cut. And as we all know, they failed to do an impact assessment, and Unite says that means the decision was irrational. Hadn't thought of it that way. That's clever. And thirdly, under the Equality Act, there is a public sector equality duty to consider the impact of the decision, particularly on the disabled who have higher heating costs. And they seem to have ignored that completely. Fourthly, there's a requirement to take into account relevant considerations, as they call them. Well, that was breached, including relating to fuel poverty and financial circumstances of those living just above the pension credit threshold, which is a massive demographic. And we know that from the comments we've received on the channel. So many people are in that position of being just a few pence or pounds over that limit, and they are suffering. Fifth, apparently in Wales there is a specific legal duty to consider the full impact of the policy, and that was ignored by the government. And then finally, the Human Rights Act requires particular areas of vulnerability to be taken into account, which could include the impact of the policy on older people and those with a disability. You know, it seems they've really got this wrong on so many levels. Unite say that given that the cut has already come into effect and taking into account the worsening winter weather, then provided the courts allow the judicial review to proceed, they anticipate a fairly rapid hearing of the case. They say, quite rightly, that the government can end the uncertainty by agreeing to withdraw the regulations now. I mean, that's great news from Unite. So watch this space and we'll keep you updated. Finally, although Rachel Reeves pledged to ensure more pounds in people's pockets, she's made changes to capital gains tax, the tax thresholds, inheritance tax and pensions too. Accordingly, those with pensions, investments and savings could find themselves with bigger tax bills. However, Sarah Coles, head of personal finance at Hargreaves Lansdown, said this can be avoided. She said it's easy to get overwhelmed by the endless post-budget debate, including this channel obviously, but we need to cut through the noise and do the right things for our finances right now. Now, the largest tax raising measure in the budget is the increase to employers' NI, pushing it up to 15%, while dropping the secondary threshold contributions from 9,100 to just 5,000. And she promised no tax hikes. Wow, thank you, Rachel. Sarah Cole says that you need to set up your savings schemes now while the going is good. And she also said that the NI increase will probably mean smaller pay rises in the future. I think that's fairly obvious, sadly. But she also said that the positive news is that inflation is still expected to drop back to 2% by the end of the forecast. So careful budgeting should help you keep on top of your spending in a way that was nigh on impossible for so many people when the inflation was in double digits. I hope that's true, but looking at the way the markets reacted to the budget, I'm not so sure that inflation will drop as much as they hope it will. But I'm no expert. As you will see when we talk about capital gains tax, she says that the basic rate of taxpayers now face is 18%. It's up from 10%, while the higher rate taxpayers will see a rise from 20% to 24%. Now, to mitigate the tax liabilities, Sarah suggests you consider utilising an annual exemption of £3,000 for realising gains gradually. She added that using the BED and ISA process to transfer assets into a stocks and shares ISA can protect you from both capital gains and dividend taxes, whatever that means. I guess if you're into this kind of thing, you'll understand all about BED and ISA processes, but for me, inheritance tax, well, from 2027, defined contribution pension pots will also be included in inheritance tax calculations, impacting maybe 8% of estates and costing nearly 1.5 billion. You can, however, consider gifting during your lifetime to reduce the estate size. Sarah Cole said that you can give up to £3,000 away each year, which will fall within your annual gift allowance. The only issue that I could see there is that inheritance tax won't affect your average pensioner, but it can affect many ordinary people who have lived in their homes for a long time and have seen the value grow. As I said in our last video, if you bought your home in the early 70s for around £3,000 or £4,000, it could now easily exceed the inheritance tax threshold. But even then, where does Joe Soap find £3,000 a year to gift to their kids? I really wouldn't recommend falling into an equity release trap either, unless you can afford to pay the interest each month, because if you don't, then your family could find they only get a fraction of the home's value. Now, the inclusion of pension pots in inheritance tax calculations may prompt retirees to rethink how they draw from these funds. Experts advise considering annuities for a guaranteed income while keeping estates below tax thresholds. Helen Morrissey, also of Hargreaves Lansdowne, has said spending down pensioners can avoid inheritance tax, allowing individuals to gift funds to families. Well, if the cap fits, fine, but I'm not sure that will really affect our lowest pensioners, so hopefully they won't suffer. As always, folks, please do seek professional advice based on your personal circumstances before committing your hard-earned pensions and savings to any particular scheme. Now, I hope you found this quick look at the budget helpful. As ever, your comments are not only welcomed, but they're valued, and we do try to read everyone, and you all have plenty to say, as we know. And with almost 1.5 million views of our channel, we're delighted that so many of you have found a home here with us. Thank you for subscribing, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Grey Matters. And until then, it's bye for now.